Welcome back to another insightful discussion here on the Champions Path, a platform for all things simulation and training, designed for our champions in the military, law enforcement, and other critical first responder roles. Today, I have the honor of discussion with Arcadia Cognerati's Greg Williams and Brian Marren. Arcadia Cognerati, specifically these two gentlemen, are the world leaders in human behavior pattern recognition and analysis and human performance capabilities. Their team develops realistic cognitive training curriculum, and their methods and practices of teaching replicate how humans actually learn through experiences in an ecological setting. With a collaborative effort of Arcadia Cognerati and MILO, a world-leading interactive simulation solution provider, have designed the Hoberman series, a set of law enforcement scenarios designed to create a highly interactive and holistic solution, which will be our main topic of discussion today. So, gentlemen, welcome to the Champions Path.
Thanks for having us on, Jared. Appreciate it.
Honored to be here. Longtime fan, Jared.
Oh, yeah, I really appreciate that. So before diving into the Hoberman series, I want to understand a little more about human behavior pattern recognition and analysis, human performance, and more importantly, the relationship between the two. So, Greg, I want to start with you. You guys are doing the Lord's work over there at Arcadia Cognerati. Can you give a further summary of your mission, methodology, and practices of teaching?
Yeah, simply, there are pre-event indications of every activity that humans are involved with. So whether it's a person, a place, a vehicle, event, the idea is that you can determine the most likely course of action and most dangerous course of action of each of those things through observation. Now, observation's not enough. You have to have anticipation and perception, and you have to have training to take your flashlight and turn it into a laser so you can actually look at things through a lens of cognition, science, logic, and then come up with artifacts and evidence to support a reasonable conclusion that things are going well and you don't need to do anything, or things are sliding left or right of where you want to be and you have to intercede. So we like to teach people how to engage in advanced critical thinking and understand that every thing that they'll engage in has opportunity and danger, how to manage those successfully.
Awesome. Thank you. And I appreciate you keeping it simple, stupid for me, because I like to keep things in a simplistic manner. Brian, as a fellow Bella Woodsman, a U.S. Marine veteran, how did you find yourself working alongside Greg Williams?
So I was actually out on Pendleton working at, it was called the Infantry Immersive Trainer right when it was built. And it was the same thing as a lot of immersive technology. Well, it was a couple things. It was a training platform for Marines prior to deployment. And, the idea of General Mattis's idea behind it was, one of Marine's first firefight to be no worse than his last training evolution. He had this idea for this sort of enclosed gymnasium sort of thing where you can go in as a squad level training and really conduct simulation training, right? But I mean, not on the computer or anything like that, just actual simulation training, and then come out, with a better understanding of what the physiological reactions are going to be, how that decision making works in those extreme situations, and actually put you through a process. And so finally, after he took over MEF and was in charge, he had the money to do it, so he just built it at an old what we used to be like a tomato or strawberry packing facility out on northern part of Camp Pendleton. And so I was out there early on with that, with a whole DARPA project called the FIGHT JCTD, the Future Immersive Training Environment Joint Capabilities Technology Demonstration. So out there doing that. So we were looking at existing technologies, doing some human performance measuring, looking at decision making, critical thinking during extreme situations, and kind of integrating it all together, find out what works with simulation, what doesn't, what needs to happen, where do we need to invest the money in, what works and what doesn't. It was the big thing. And actually during that time, Greg was implementing the Combat Hunter program. And so they would come out as sort of another part of that overall stuff that was going on at one MEF at the time, just sort of, I guess, different areas. And so that's where I originally ran into Greg. And then, first when he was talking about Combat Hunter and human behavior and all this stuff, my first reaction to this guy is completely full of crap. And then, so I kind of threw my own observation at the IIT of watching Marines come through who had been through combat hunter training. They were better, right? They were making better decisions. They were seeing things before they happened. So I was like, all right, maybe this guy's onto something here. And then I went on to other different government projects, doing a lot of different high threat protection for different government agencies all over the world. And then I kept running into Greg. And then finally, I think in Afghanistan in like 2012 or 13, I think it was 2012, he was like, "Hey, man, like we keep running into each other. Do you want to come work for us?" And we were implementing the ASAT program, the Advanced Situational Awareness Training for the Army that Greg wrote. It was basically kind of like their version of Combat Hunter. And so I helped out with that, and then a bunch of future other programs. And then a few years back, we tried to get out of the Beltway and start our own with Arcadia Cognerati, which we still keep getting pulled back in to the Beltway. But that's sort of the origin story, I guess, and for how I ran into Greg.
Yeah, excellent. So, Greg, I want to see if my head is in the right place here, see if I can regurgitate this succinctly. Proactive versus reactive, right? So the observation and identification and information gathering of verbal and nonverbal cues.
Yeah. So what I kept running into, I've done training since the late 70s, 1970s, not 18. And what I kept running into is these epistemological barriers in training. And what that means is that there's a lot of people who write a lot of books about a lot of theories that have never been outside the wire, never been out on the road, never been in a pursuit, never been in a shooting. And the idea is that you don't, you can be a great doctor without being a great surgeon. But sometimes you have to kind of delve into the anatomy a little deeper. So I always had these views of ontology where, look, we have to bring the realism into the training. And then people started picking up on that and said, hey, you need to come in because that was sort of the gateway into virtual reality, right? And I was doing all live training at the time. So in live training, you can simulate absolutely anything that you want to about pre-event indications and then reintroduce the cues over time to the people that are observing. And then if the cue isn't powerful enough, you can increase the fidelity, you can increase the granularity, and then sooner or later the brain kicks in and goes, it's Where's Waldo? Hey, he's got a gun. And then now you can shape the learning outcomes. So what happened is that with all the theory that was going on, there was a lot of crappy training that was available. Now I'm talking about cops and first responders and the military. So I was lucky enough that somebody literally drove out to my ranch, picked me up and brought me to California and said, here, we want you to compete with these other people for this new training thing. We're not sure what it is yet, but we have this general idea. And I'm blessed because that day when they came and picked me up, they thrust me to the forefront of this. I was nobody. I was nothing. I've been nowhere, just conducting training on small scale with units I was familiar with. And this took me to, well, literally the international stage.
Excellent. This this model really reminds me of a more intricate version of John Boyd's OODA loop, the observe, orient, decision, action. How does this translate into improved skills for law enforcement, military, security professionals?
Yeah, and Brian, if you'll allow me just to jump on this first.
Yeah, please, Greg.
So,
go ahead.
Here's the thing. I heard John Boyd brief twice. Both briefs were very different, although the OODA loop itself was the same. And I want you to understand that when we talk about John Boyd's OODA loop, I want you to think of being a competitive swimmer. You're in the water against the time clock and against those other opponents, but your specific skill doesn't do a lot to pay the other people that are swimming on that same team behind you. He was a fighter pilot, and it's great, but trying to apply just the simplest of his architecture to like business or to human resources and stuff, I think there's a disconnect there. So what I tried to do is I tried to take a look at this and say, look, all of us have an allostatic load. We all have the chronic stress, life events, all those other things. So if we can put those things in space-time and we can stretch out the distance that you're making the observation, you get the gift of time and distance. So literally what I would do with police officers is take a vehicle barn where they were doing maintenance on midnight shift in the winter and set up a bunch of cameras and then set the vehicles in a felony stop and then give a hard but solvable conundrum to the coppers. Hey, the plate's coming back, no record on computer, the driver's fidgeting, now you got to talk. And what I would do is I would slow time down and go through and show them how all of these individual things can come together like breadcrumbs leading to something, and then say, okay, what's the best choice that you can make? What's the best decision that you can make under stress, in extremis? And guess what? That training caught on fast. And so when I was lucky enough to get in front of the Center for Emerging Threats and Opportunities, that's a Marine think tank, they immediately said, oh, you got to go to Potomac Institute. And then Potomac Institute said, hey, there's this guy Mattis on the West Coast who's got these insane ideas, and him and Conway on the East Coast want to put together a program. Well, all of those things sort of shaped my destiny because, I'm responsible for one paragraph out of your entire life. But that paragraph was memorable enough to throw me forward into these other situations. And we're lucky enough to keep doing it now. I mean, Brian and I are still relevant, which is magic. And I'd love to pass the baton to him so he can explain how we're like the iPhone, because that's a great thing. But I mean, Brian and I literally just came back from St. Louis. We were at the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association speaking. Days before that, we were at the Missouri State Highway Patrol. Days before that, I was down in Dallas talking to these private groups. It's amazing where this type of training can get you if you do it right. And I would love, Jared, if you just allow Brian to give that analogy of the phone. I think it really clears things up.
Absolutely. Please, Brian.
Yeah, well, what Greg's kind of referring to is kind of what Combat Hunter was, I guess, back in the day. But that was I would say that was the first iPhone, which it was revolutionary and it was amazing. And if you've never seen an iPhone, it's like the coolest thing on the face of the earth. But it's now 2024, not 2006 or something. So, and a lot of folks have just they've stuck with that iPhone. It's kind of like the Boyd's OODA loop. It's like, well, we've got this right here. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you have to adapt that, and it has to continue to evolve, or it's going to devolve. Amen. It's one of the two, and so that's what we're doing now, right? We're on the latest iPhone and developing the next one, and it just goes back to what Greg said. Even with Boyd's OODA loop, is there's it starts with what? Observe. It's like, well, in our world, we say, look, there's a whole entire world before you observe something, before there's perception in your environment. And that's called anticipation. There's only so many things that can happen. There's a lot of complexity in it because all the factors are interdependent and intradependent on one another. And there's one factor will completely change the outcome of the situation. But there's still only so many outcomes. And so how do I reduce the uncertainty and the complexity in those situations by sticking with knowns? Well, I've got a whole bunch of life experience, whether that's in law enforcement or not, just being a human being, to know what are some potential likely outcomes. What can I expect out of this situation? And so when you start priming yourself for that, you start figuring it out before the situation happens, and you can train to that. A lot of people don't. A lot of what still is training is just getting better and better and better and better and faster at reacting to everything. It's like, well, that's great, but what's the problem is that the situation's already unfolding in front of you, and you're responding, and you're not influencing the situation. And all humans have the ability to influence every situation that they're in. I don't care what it is. You can. There's always options available. Now, given the situation, they might not be the best options, but you know what? There are options there, and you can influence it. And so, what happens a lot with training that we see is that you almost train and you end up creating an inevitability in different situations by saying, when these things occur, here's what it's likely means, and here's what you're going to do about it. So now I'm walking up and everyone's, oh, here we go. This is going to be a chase. It's like, well, if you're recognizing all of those things, what did you do to change it? And some of it seems counterintuitive to what everyone's doing, but it's really not. We just had a great quote from actually one of the folks who does interdiction that was just at the Missouri State Highway Patrol. And he was like, holy crap. Finally, after like this 2 days, he was like, I think on the second day of training, he's like, I've been looking at this completely backwards. We're training folks. Here's the things you need to recognize. Here's what you need to look for. He's like, no, what we need to do is exactly what you guys are talking about. What's typical right now? What should be here? What should I expect to see? How do I extract normalcy out of my environment? If I get really, 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 really good at that, I don't care what those indicators or pre-event indications are, or whatever it is that you're looking for. They're going to be so glaringly obvious that, and because those things, the reason I don't care is because tactics, techniques, procedures change all the time. And so I can either chase those, or I can just get really good at identifying what's typical. And then whatever that anomaly is, I'll see it. I'll see it automatically. And then I can start to extract information from there. So the idea is there's kind of this whole world that everyone's forgetting about. And that's really understanding what's normal, being able to articulate your environment with a lot of granularity and a lot of fidelity, to the point where some of it seems obvious, but it's really, really not. These are non-standard things you need to look for.
With that, how do you, is there a method to overcome individual biases when you are observing the environment? Is there a method to understand objective truths within those factors?
This is. I'll try first, please, Jared. This is why we love you so much.
Yeah.
What an incredible question, and so I'll do my best. The first thing is to establish a fidelity-filled baseline for every environment, and environments change constantly. Your living room is different than your bathroom, which is different than your back steps. And if you protract that out, that's different from your car and from the freeway and from going to work. And the lobby at your work is different than your desk. So every baseline needs constant updating. And if you're hyper alert, you're going to blow your own brains out by the end of the day. You can't do that. First of all, your resources, your mind and
unsustainable,
the ability to process information, you can't sustain that. And the second part of that is it's unnecessary. So the idea is, if you understand just a few scientific principles, like we break everything down into psychological, physiological, and sociological. So each one of those is a baseline that interweaves your entire day. If you understand those basic principles, then it becomes a program that's running in the back of your head for normalcy, clinical normalcy, what you should expect to see, what I saw yesterday at this time, where I go to breakfast, how far do I generally run my vehicle before I fill it with fuel? What do I do when the warning light comes on or I hear something? Those are all indices, right? And we've been dealt cards. Think of it in context as a deck of playing cards, 52 cards. But there's a joker and there's instructions. So we actually got 54. And so that leaves us with all of these potential template matches in our environment. And between the lines, like there's 4 kings and 4 aces, but they're each a little different. So between the lines, we have these prototypical matches. And what happens is your brain is making them anyway. So if we take a giant evolutionary step back into our survival brain, into our limbic system, and play with our neocortex, our prefrontal cortex, to sense differences, the patterns that differences make rise up or fall below what you should expect to see. And that becomes a warning. Danger, warning, Will Robinson. Now we get the flashing lights and it says, hey, how much calories do I need to investigate this? Well, if it's engine warning light, I probably got a little bit of time. Normally, it doesn't go engine warning light, engine explodes, I'm stranded. But certain environments, hey, this guy's walking up on me kind of fast. It looks like he's paying attention to just me, and it looks like he's got his hand in my pocket. Houston, we may have a problem. So you can do this just by listening to our podcast or reading our textbook or some other means. But in-person training, live training, even though it's resource intensive and time consuming, is still the best way to tune your radio frequency, because humans are always on transmit, into being able to receive what others are sending you. And once you've made that connection, that synapse is the most important thing. And Boyd had it. But Boyd is like fly fishing with flip pallet. You're fishing with an expert and he keeps catching and he goes, oh, it's all in the fly. Okay, that's great. He gave you that, right? But if he doesn't break down the etymology and kneel down by the bank and tip over the rock and show you the insect and talk about the trout's mouth and the hook, then you got nothing. So that's what we do. And VR excited us. VR excited me. And then I met Brian. But the reason virtual reality is all the same, whether it's a flat screen, room-based system, head-mounted display, everybody's at about the same level, and nobody is succeeded past what Fight JCTD did. But if you can combine and augment your training with virtual reality that contains elements of human behavior pattern recognition, then analysis can come. So what we do is a series of live training events to get your brain coded, and then going into the virtual can sustain a tremendous amount of your training and save your agency a lot of money. But it can't go the other way. This is Greg's humble opinion. It can't all start with augmented reality, VR, AI, and then all of a sudden you're thrust out on the street. As a matter of fact, final thing I'll say on the California just had a bunch of cadets that said, wow, we loved the training that we got in virtual. It was amazing. Okay, you're a cadet at a police academy. Somebody's just introduced you to the topic and they throw you into a game and you like the game. I could have predicted that outcome, So let's make sure we're talking about how training works, and training in your brain has to be built. It's not education. It has to be built in specific doses over time.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Greg kind of went right into it. Is what are you utilizing this stuff for? And the big thing I always mention, that was my first exposure really on the research side to this type of technology was in 2008, and that was with the technology available in 2008. And so we were making stuff work there, even though it didn't quite have the fidelity that it does today, it wasn't as good. We made it cognitively real, cognitively close enough. And that's what you're trying to do. And the other reason I bring that up is, the DoD did all the research on this stuff and way back then and found out it's all available publicly. And now I see this stuff coming out where people are either researching things that have already been kind of concluded, or doing things with the technology that's unnecessary, that it was not built for, and using it incorrectly. And then, still trying to, well, what about this? Let's take a look at this. And it's like, all I saw, the difference between 2008 and today is, it got lighter, it got cheaper, it got better quality graphics, and the user interface got better. And that's it. No one's actually addressing the training issue with any of it. It's just, can we make this look more realistic? It's like, well, that's kind of unnecessary for your brain, right? You laugh at comedy movies, you get scared during horror films, you feel suspense, during drama. That's not real. It's a movie, and it's a movie going into it. So, that's part of it. It's like you just have to get it cognitively close enough to your brain to get some of those catecholamines going, to get it working, to loop into the conversation. It'll fill in all the missing details because it does that anyway. It's just like to what you talked about, coming up and how do I, not fall into different biases? Well, first of all, I understand where you're coming from the question, but, biases are not bad. It's not a negative term. I want to when I go to a doctor, I want to see one with some really nicely honed cognitive biases. So he figures out or she figures out what my issue is right away. And the other thing is this is why we talk about extracting normalcy from your environment and comparisons. Every observation you make is a comparison to some known in your life. So are you looking at this? Are you doing hypothesis testing? Are you gathering artifacts and evidence? Or are you walking in with a predetermined conclusion and making everything fit? And that you can help. That you can change. You can look at it. Is this the most likely thing I'm going to see? Is this the most dangerous thing? If I'm seeing this, what is it about it that I feel is different? Can I articulate it? Because naming something is going to help me understand it. So I want to sense, make, and problem solve and arrive at that conclusion, right? But I got to use the artifacts and evidence to lead me there. And so that's a process to set up in training that you can do. You can learn how to do, right? It's just a different way of looking at it.
If I could dovetail on that, look, here the bias is reality. So the goal of all of these systems that right now are no better than Fight JCTD, the goal is the illusion of a realistic world with some sort of ability to interact with that world. So you can really, really, really use it, intro to Hoberman, you can really use it to create those things in your world that you can't pay for, that are too expensive to pay for. I need 9 vehicles at this emergency scene, and I need 27 people, each of them dressed in a specific way or a different way, and I need 17 buildings. Well, I have to go to a mount site, and I got to get a helo, and all those things you can create in this virtual world. But we don't need stuff like the virtual pain that's associated with it, or the recoil. We'll talk about that in a minute, because your brain understands that it's a composite world anyway. Your brain knows it's a game. So stop trying to make the game so realistic to fool the brain, where I think 97.5 thousand years from that. And take a look backwards for a minute. The Fight JCTD was a 3-year program, $36 million. It spent a total of $400 additional million to get the best experts in the world to come in and talk about AI, augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality, and conduct these studies with very rigid standards. And now what are we doing? We're doing, somebody goes, well, it'll be better that we have live sound and smell generators. And guess what? My method has been peer reviewed. Let's abandon science and just take these gigantic leaps of faith, back to epistemology. I don't believe in that. I think that what we need to do is take these incredible advances in science and the type of biases that we have to fight, we can fight in the game. So having everybody agree with one thing, groupthink is a type of bias that confirmation bias feeds. We can fight that in the game. Having a worldview that's different from the AO that you're going to fly into, we can change those biases. We can tune them to be better biases in the game. So what we're using the game for is a very binary shoot, don't shoot, black and white. Here we come. What do you do? Oh, it's a radio. Oh, it's a lighter. Oh, it's a cell phone. And that's ridiculous. That jack in the box mentality is exactly why we went with Hoberman.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So let me see if I can regurgitate this, right? Mm-hmm. So normalcy in high fidelity or fidelity baseline, right? Normalcy, fidelity baseline becomes a bias, but an objective reality bias. And you are emerging in the emergence in an appropriate simulation system for realistic training.
If it's constructed and close to real, not absolutely real, close to real.
Right. Okay, so let's move from the environmental factors to human performance. Brian, let me know if I think I have a better understanding, and because I'm a little more familiar with this. And Brian, let me know what your thoughts are. Human performance, individual physical skills, cognitive skills, problem solving, critical thinking, emotional stress or emotional and stress regulation in an optimal performance level when acting based on observation and orientation and decision. Right. So it seems like human performance is more of a skill set that's required for taking action.
Yeah. And specifically when we say human performance, we fall under cognitive performance. I don't care, what your resting heart rate is and what you can do in the gym and all that stuff. Right. We're talking about sense making and problem solving, decision making skills. And so there are factors and limits to cognition and cognitive performance that everyone, that affects everyone. I don't care what level of training you are or experience you have. But at a very basic level, the less training, the less education, the less experience I have, the more likely I am to resort to a higher level of violence. Meaning I'm more likely to overreact because then everything in my environment is always filtered through your limbic system. I don't care who you are. And so it goes, oh, wait a minute, this is it. And I'm automatically going to resort to this is life or death. And I have to do something about it. So what we're trying to do, because everyone will say, well, you're going to have these limited factors, you have auditory exclusion and tunnel vision will happen and these things. It's like, well, it doesn't have to. If you don't become overwhelmed by events, that will not happen to you. And the way our approach to not becoming overwhelmed by events or overwhelmed by emotion is to get better at the critical thinking skill. So the psychological arousal doesn't get so much that I'm getting those very kind of limbic responses, we'll call them, right? Mm-hmm. So how do I do that? Well, I have to sense, make, and problem solve, right? So you think of like someone with no experience versus someone with a ton of experience showing up to a scene, right? Well, how do I unpack that person with a ton of experience and get that person with less experience, more knowledge, more skill, so that they can figure out the situation? And that's what we do. So the idea is I want to arrive at a reasonable conclusion faster so I can influence my environment. And that's what we mean just by that cognitive performance is you can't slow down time in the sense of slowing down the rotation of the earth, right? Things are happening, but I can slow down my perception of time. I can increase my ability, my cognitive acumen to understand my environment faster. I can know and be more aware of the things that are limiting me in my observation, so I can change my tactics. Maybe I literally need to take 5 steps over there to gain a different perspective on the situation. How do I bring in more of this information? Greg was saying is like people are constantly on transmit. Your environment's constantly on transmit. We're processing more photons and more perceptions every second of the day than we ever thought imaginable. So if I get really good at recognizing those, starting with what's normal, looking for those things and focusing on what matters in my environment based on that context, well, then I'm good no matter what. I'm good when I'm dealing with that erratic person on the street, but I'm good when I walk into the house and I'm dealing with my wife and the insurgent, the little 11-year-old girl I have here at home who's constantly trying to make my life chaos, right? So it doesn't matter the situation. And that's the whole thing, is that this is something that you need to focus on for life, for humans. It's not just, all right, when I'm at work or when I'm in training. It's like, well, if that's the only time that your thing is going to work, then maybe you need to get a different thing. I mean, you can't have one tool, a specific tool for every specific situation. I want one. I want the hammer that I can also do 37 other things with, not just hammer and nail. I want that. That's what we're looking at. And as humans, we're technically born with the ability to do that, or the capability. We're born with that, but we don't get a lot of practice in it anymore. We don't get a lot of understanding of those things because of that reliance on technology. And it goes right back into the VR state. All right, well, let's put it on and do this. Okay, now let's run around the building and put it on. Hey, can we add a gun in here? It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Where are we going with this? And those are things that are done because people are really trying hard to utilize this stuff better, and they're thinking they're doing something, and it's like you're actually probably making the situation worse, and you're using something other than the purpose for which it was designed for.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and jump into the Hoberman series. I think that it's important to expand upon the Fidelity since we're talking about it. You have the Hoberman sphere there. What is the relationship with MILO? Why MILO? And what challenges? And you've obviously expanded upon this. The challenges that your team was aiming to solve with this partnership.
Yeah, and I'll let Brian explain that in detail. I just want to make sure that you understand how we got to sit at the table. And just 30 seconds, all of the work that I created for all of the defense agencies and for the military and police agencies has been studied and vetted by Defense Technical Information Center, ONR, Office of Naval Research, Army Research Institute, Defense Intelligence Agency, PEO, STRIDE, Program Executive Office, Simulation Training and Instrumentation, the old JFCOM, JAIDO, studied at the ICT. I've done programs for Disney Imagineering, Bohemia Interactive, VBS, Virtual Battle Space for Bohemia, esports, the shooting games that you've probably heard of. And the reason I want to make sure that I say that before we sought out a place like MILO is there's a lot of companies out there, and they're bringing you a thing. We're not creating a thing. We're bringing you a think, a different way of looking at situations that'll make you, that'll improve your human cognitive performance. And Brian was talking about being faster than me, faster than I was when I got here to training, and faster than you, so I can outthink you. So I'm smarter, faster, stronger, and harder to kill. I just want to preface by making sure that's why we went out and said, hey, we know something you don't. Would you be willing to listen?
Yeah, and then MILO. There's a lot of folks out there doing this, and we've talked to a number of different companies and have some other folks on the either inside or periphery of those companies that we've talked to about them. And just with MILO had their systems work great. They're very reliable systems, and there was a recognition on their part already that, like, hey, we need to get better content. We need to do something else. We need to, there's something we're missing here. And we briefed them and said, this is the idea behind it. And they didn't fully understand it. And they decided, okay, well, we'll put some trust in you because, of your bona fides and what you've done. We get this. but it's different. It's revolutionary in that field of what we're doing because no one's doing it that way. It's just gone down the same old kind of track of let's just put a scenario together. And again, this is not trying to bash anyone that develops those scenarios,
Nope.
but a lot of people don't have a lot of training and education in scenario development and how to put together something that's realistic. It's just taken from what they know. And the military is a perfect example. It's like you ask a young soldier, marine, sailor, airman. You go, hey, well, where'd you learn that, or who taught you that? Oh, my team leader. Then you go ask their team leader, and they're like, okay, well, who taught you that? Well, my team leader did. And you go back to their old team leader, who taught you that? Well, my team leader. It's like, well, so no one's ever risen past the level of their team leader showing them how to do something. Where is it coming from the subject matter expert?
Right.
Where's the pure signal that we need to base everything off of? And so that happens a lot with training, and it's really well intentioned, but it doesn't quite hit the mark. And what we're trying to do, obviously, is create that fidelity. So it's a brain game. It's an exercise in critical thinking. So rather than just having that discussion, like you have a tabletop exercise, or we walk through and discuss certain events. Okay, what if this? And Greg did it right there when he was talking about back in the day with we're going to set up a camera right here because they probably weren't even in the vehicles yet, and we're going to have two vehicles parked right here, and we're going to talk through what happens, and you're going to pause and say, hang on, tack freeze. What if this occurs, or what else are you seeing? That's just as good. But now the beauty of it in 2024 is you can actually put that into a headset, but you can actually do that and repeat that an infinite number of times and have different outcomes based on the decisions you make. That's the beauty, is you can actually take that simple parking lot, 10 minutes of going through something, which has more value than you can possibly imagine. And now I can put it in something that I can repeat. Now there's a standard. Now I can, so that's the idea that we're trying to do. But it's still focusing on the elements of critical thinking, decision making, and an interactive what if game that's real and cognitively close enough. It's not, you don't have to train for the real event because you don't know what that's going to be. You have to train for a real event. This is something I've seen before. Use the experience and knowledge you have from those interactions you've had before and place it in this new novel circumstance. Well, that's adaptability. That's what we're training here. You want to be adaptable. You want to draw on what you already know. So how do I create stronger neural connections with those memory motion links that I have, with the training that I have, with the experience, so that I can use everything I have available to me? And that's basically the idea of what Hoberman is.
I want to see if I can bring a new perspective to the critical thought process. And I'm really interested in your thoughts if this is applicable. I play chess every day. It's a thinking man's game, lots of strategy, critical thought under time constraints. And what do I consider critical thinking? There isn't a single way to skin a cat. There isn't a single way to capture the king, right? There are many avenues depending on the board configuration and or the opponent's game style, gameplay. So strategy and critical thought. I prefer in-person matches because it represents, or it presents the opportunity to read the body language. Virtual matches present their own set of context clues regarding the game style of an opponent. And what I find is a great overall strategy of gameplay is an early offensive opening. This allows me to be proactive and control the center of the board as the game plays out based on my experiences. The most likely courses of action that the opponent plays. And by recalling experiences of similar games that I've played, I've stored contingencies, counters to those already mapped out. So no matter where the opponent places its pieces, I have a counter to those counters and counters to those counters. Now, unsurprisingly, or maybe surprisingly, I don't win every game. And this is what is great about chess.com. I can look back at the analytics and identify exactly where I went wrong. And winning a game of chess is simply a series of making strong, positive decisions. Not the perfect decision, but strong decisions. And chess.com has also a great analytical tool to conduct an AAR and after action, because through the replay, I can see the strength of each move as well as my percentage of probability of winning. And if I make a mistake, let's say that 90% might drop down to a 50% based on that move. So not every game plays out exactly the same. Not a lot of matches, a lot of matches have similar gameplay, and a lot of players have similar play styles, and a lot of moves have similar counters. So playing someone for the first time, I can draw on similar games and outcomes and position myself in an offensive manner. So where am I going with this? The premise of the Hoberman series is to foster strategic thinkers. So Greg, how might the Hoberman series be similar, and how might it be different than this chess analogy?
So when you go back in and edit this, because I don't think it's live, what I want you to do is at the end, before you ask me the question, just flip and drop the mic, go, and walk off. Because what you did is you perfectly described tactical cunning and tactical patience. And you have to understand, which you do, meaning you listening to me, true cognitive thinking is much more like a Hoberman sphere than a roadmap. So you don't come out with binary decisions, and everything influences your decision. The experience level, how much you had to drink the night before. Did you get enough sleep? Are you hydrated? You didn't even go into those, and those are all there too, right? So the idea, we built Hoberman as the cognitive chess match, let's use your term, and to add it to what MILO already has as an incredible system. Look, all systems are the same. Listen to the sound of my voice. But what differentiates MILO is, one, they're adding Hoberman, which shows that they're already really looking at the cognitive. And the second part is you're teaching your brain to expand its threshold of cognitive control so you can explore numerous alternative futures. You can plan and rehearse a new response to a brand new novel situation or an age-old situation, chess 101, and you can limit your cognitive distractions or add cognitive distractions. You can make it a benign situation or a tense situation, and you can learn to alter or adjust or fine-tune your biases and behaviors to achieve these goals. And so now MILO becomes more than a shoot training system. It becomes a training system to help you when you're testifying in court, when you're writing your report, when you're first on the scene and the suspect is gone and you want to gather the greatest information. So rather than exactly replicating a specific law enforcement interaction or encounter, what we try to do is optimize numerous possible outcomes and interventions. And then now you have these novel and, very laser focused critical thinking insights. And that leads to an acceptable legal, moral, cognitive, scientific, logical decision. And you epitomize that by, and we're stealing it, by the way, Jared, by just taking that chess match and showing all of the interoperability that's going on there and all the variables. Now, you're saying, but we can't do that because the police officers, you can't do that, but police officers race to a scene with lights and sirens, jump out, and are handed a binary decision. But if you increase the distance and the time, if you understand space-time, and if you get the right amount of training, guess what? Not every decision has to be inevitable. And that's why I think these other companies who do great things, and there's nobody out there going, Simon Bar-Sinister, we want to ruin your cognition. Nobody's doing that. They all think they're doing great stuff, but they just haven't studied enough. They haven't read enough. They haven't looked at the outcomes of the fight JCTD. Look, if your company has leveraged $436 million in this field, then I'll read your book. But until then, you have to go back to the simplest, lowest calorie intervention, and Hoberman is that. Hoberman is you coming into a world that's already spinning, just like your life and police work, and walking on to a set that has been predetermined by a whole bunch of things that were outside of your control, just like being in the military. And now guess what? You need to solve for X. And while solving for X, there's new and novel circumstances that are happening. And controlling Hoberman, we've built it so the controller, the person that's running your MILO system, can adjust it like a rheostat. If they see that you're obviously flailing, they can slow time down and slow down the granularity and continue the fidelity. What does that mean? That means less environmental and baseline challenges and more, hey, look over here again. Hey, what might I be telling you? Now you can explore that. And guess what? You can call attack freeze, take a knee, and go, look, I want to run this again. You can't do that on the street, right? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could? But that allows you to have the cognitive control to plan and try again. And guess what? Your brain loves that, and it kicks out neurotransmitters when you're right. So if you can think through and then win a tough but solvable situation, you want to repeat that behavior when you're on the street, when you're in front of people. So Hoberman is a concept. It's a theory. And when we introduce it, there's a lot of people on the science side that go, yes, this works. Then there's a lot of people on the building the machine side that say, yeah, it works, but we're already selling machines. Thanks for nothing. And then we get to the street, and the street people go, this is exactly the machine we need. So the hardest part of our business now is connecting the dots, making you understand what this does. And listen, Jared, you do so much good for the industry. And what I mean, again, the law enforcement and the first responders and the military, what we're trying to build is a form of psychological, physiological, and sociological triage before you step into that. On the way to the incident, you talk about bias. What about the dispatcher bias? What about the witness bias? What about all those things? We can't do that on every call, but we can do it in a machine. And guess what? The computer, in your simulations for chess, the computer loses, doesn't it? So the idea of giving all our faith to this computer architecture that's going to solve all our problems, it's ridiculous. So AI, VR are only going to be as good as the programmers. And you know what? Nobody builds a cognitively real scenario or simulation better than we do. So by bringing us along, MILO showed, and they're still dipping their toe in testing water, but they showed that, hey, listen, we're going to take a chance and not just hire a cognitive division by going out and looking for PhDs that mastered in cognition. Yeah, the U.S. military wanted to make sure I was the right guy, so they gave me multiple vacation tours to the most dangerous places on the face of the planet and made me in bed with the troops to go outside the wire. So until those other experts had seen it from that perspective and lived it like you have, Jared, they're not going to fully understand it. So let's embrace what we know now and do the best job we can with what we have today. That iPhone, right? And then as these technological advances come along, let's infuse them when they're necessary. But what we're doing is we're letting technology lead the train. And so the train goes where these new advances go, and that means we're spinning our tires. We're not listening to Boyd's OODA loop at all, are we? So I say, let's make sure we take that giant evolutionary step backwards. We understand as much as we'll ever know about the brain right now. In 6 months or 6 years, that may change. But let's leverage what we know now and create a system of training that shows biofeedback markers that indicate the person is engaging in critical thinking. And testing and assessment should be that, not how many bullets I put on target and did I hit the X-ring. I can't flip a tire anymore. Used to be able to do that shit. I can't fast rope out of a helo anymore. Used to be able to do that shit. So now you know what? Now I'm going to do what you're doing with your chess match, but I'm going to teach the kid how to play chess and let them take it to the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, what an incredible program, Brian. Do you have anything to?
Off of that? I love your chess analogy, and it's great for so many reasons. And you actually identified some stuff. Right off the bat, you said, "Well, I kind of prefer in person because you're a human being, and you want to you understand implicitly that there's other things you can pick up on when it's you versus a person that you otherwise couldn't when it's you versus a machine." Right, because you're cognitively you have an ability to do that you cannot do. You can't interface with a computer in the same way. So I love that. And then you right off said I like taking early offensive action, and that's what we mean. It's not just about passive perception and trying to figure out what I'm seeing. It's influence. How do you go out there and influence the environment? And that doesn't have to be, all right, you go over there, you sit down and take control. No, but I can influence and I can talk. I can move over here. I can engage someone else. There's that offensive action. Doesn't have to be anything. It could be I pull someone over as a police officer and we sit there for a minute, and then I get on my intercom before ever getting out of my vehicle and say, hey, can you pull ahead about 100 meters up on your right over there? Okay, now what is this person doing? Well, now they're reacting to me. Now I'm influencing the environment just to throw a rock in the pond and to change things up, because now that person has to come up with some new plan if they have one. Mm-hmm. And so I can do that. And then, mm-hmm. you brought up the chess.com and everything. Well, I can go back then and see my analytics and see what it is. Mm-hmm. And that's great, but not everything that we measure matters, and not everything that matters is measured. And there's, so this is where it comes into because I love game theory. But this is where the problems come in when you're trying to do game theory, you're trying to use, some Bayesian form of statistical inference on how to do this stuff. What you're talking about with interactions between people, especially in law enforcement, these are non-repeating events that occur naturally. And what I mean by that is I just saw one, some company came out with, well, we did this experiment and, there's so much variability in how these different officers responded. It's like, well, no crap. Like, how did you not know that already? How are you in training and you don't know, understand it? Right. And so the idea is, when with the problem with the game theory stuff, and this was my problem with everyone using Boyd's OODA loop as well, is, chess is a perfect example. There are rules in chess, and both people playing the game of chess have to follow those rules. That is different than real life, especially when you're talking about police versus, someone or interacting with someone in the public for whatever reason. There's only one person in that situation that has to follow a rigid set of rules, and that's the police officer, right? If I'm the suspect, I get to do what I want to do. I don't have to listen to your rules. I don't have to drive the speed limit. I don't have to care about anyone's safety. I don't have to do any of that stuff. It's about me and what I want to do. Well, you can't do that if you're on the other end. So this is where the game theory analogies kind of fall apart a little bit. I mean, it's absolutely still there when you're looking at it from an analysis point of view, but when you're trying to measure outcomes or measure success, what is that to you? I can tell when it's a lawsuit, when you do something wrong and what it costs, and it puts a dollar amount on it. But what are those ways that we're measuring? So I love all the stuff and I love game theory, but a lot of times it doesn't translate over into real life for these situations. It does for plenty of others, but for these, there's not. So everyone's trying to look at it as, how do we measure this and what's the probability of it's like you can't put a number on it. I can say in a situation that this outcome is more likely than that outcome based on artifacts and evidence. I can do that. You can learn how to do that. Say what's most likely going to occur. And then you can think that's going to happen. And 3 seconds later it might change. Mm-hmm. But the idea, it's what is the most effective decision you can make, at the soonest possible measure. Where can you intervene with the lowest calorie expenditure to get the best bang for your buck outcome. And that's what it's all about. And that's how our approach is. But I love the chess analogies. Just, I always like to point out, especially to my statistician friends that look at everything through numbers. It's like, well, here's the thing. These events are not repeatable. It's not the same thing. It is prototypically, but because there are so many different factors in that environment that influence the outcome, that the reason that car got in that accident was because the road was wet. And if it wasn't, they would have kept driving and they would have ran out of gas and everything would have been fine. But now it hit a van and killed 3 people. You get it? So you can't look at the same model for the same thing. You just have to conceptually go at it in the same manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good perspective. And I'll take a royalty anytime you guys use the chess.
Oh, I'm telling, we're using it, Jared. We're using it. Yeah. So remember that anytime that you're measuring something against a baseline, there's a lot of theory out there. I'm, again, going to ontology. Okay, this I can prove. I can prove that DARPA, under a number of tests, and the Stanford Research Institute proved that my theory on atomic actions influencing an environment are true, and that they can be used as beacons, as alarms, as warnings to a dangerous situation that's arriving. So when I came up with Hoberman, and Brian and I are sitting there batting literally the Hoberman sphere around, hence the name. And then the 2 things that influence Brian and I the most are a jack in the box and the Hoberman sphere. And the idea that surprise and your reaction to surprise, can we diminish that? Well, yeah, if we start with surprise as being the end state of every encounter, then guess what? We need a jack in the box. If we understand Brian's rationale, well thought out and well said, by the way, Brian, that every encounter changes and there's a number of factors, then what you're going to get is you're going to get the response that my critical thinking can't handle the situation because it's too vast. That's where fidelity comes in. Look, all you need to do is get to a level of cognitive fidelity that stresses your brain, and that anxiety will build up an action, and that action creates the synapse between the axon and the dendrite in the brain, And now the more we repeat that behavior, positive or negative, remember, danger warning, Will Robinson, the more we'll build up myelination, and that makes that faster. So I can outthink a cunning opponent if I have more file folders for decisions. That's why you play chess, and that's why you test your numbers. But you don't sit there and rely on your numbers and say, this one's 56 and this one's 58% likelihood, so I'll go with the 58. You don't do that. You enlist your knowledge of all those factors and your experience. And that's what we want with Hoberman. And that's what we do in our normal training as well. So Hoberman is an adjunct for MILO for these situations. But in our in-person training and our virtual training, and certainly with the MILO, we want to stimulate your thinking. If we can get you thinking along the right paths and making small decisions that lead to big outcomes, then we've got something. And you know what? We save money, we save time, and we reinforce it through FTO or through, on-the-job training, through hip pocket training in the military with your supervisor, your sergeant, taking the lowest level action with that private and that corporal, and now you've changed the world. That's your Mobius loop of advancing technology and knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what an incredible program. And I want to shift gears and discuss training improvements in these virtual simulation programs, since you guys had touched on it, and discuss this elephant in the room, because I do believe the intent to produce quality solutions is there. And I recently posted a video. I recently posted a video called The Perfect Storm for Virtual Simulation Adoption. And the number one factor was like you guys had mentioned, the technological advancements and how rapid software and hardware have evolved over the past decade, which is good. However, I would argue that solutions that hit the market that don't collaborate with the science of skills transfer and evidence-based education, but focus on the technology innovation as a selling point is counterintuitive to meaningful training, and not necessarily calling any provider out, but using this as, maybe more of a thought experiment as more and more companies hit the market with solutions, trying to differentiate between quality and the fluff. Right. So, and we saw something very similar to the commercial drone boom. It's not similar necessarily in training, but in its essence, right? And when everyone and their brother was able to design and manufacture and put these drones out to market before regulatory measures could be enforced, the FAA quickly came out with, well, you can buy drones, but you can't fly them outside of your line of sight. And if you do, you need a pilot's license and coordinate with local air traffic control or something very similar to that. My point is, that the technology always moves faster than regulation, and regulation is designed for safety. It's designed for quality, control, credibility, and potential certifications, et cetera. And to develop a credible simulation system, the DoD, on one hand, has, for what it's worth, a rigorous process of verification, validation, accreditation for their virtual simulation programs that companies must abide by. There's also, like you had mentioned, PO Strive, PM Traces, right? Government yep. bodies. There's also the global initiative for standardizing amongst allied nations, drafted by the NATO Modeling and Simulation Group, for simulation companies to go through a certification process. And this initiative regulates quality and standardizes solutions for interoperability, right? Cross-functional use. And then on the other hand, there isn't a universal verification or accreditation program for simulation companies to abide by when developing these LE virtual training systems. Therefore, simulation solutions companies can easily overlook this very important aspect of design, the collaboration between science and system development. So I'd like to gain both of your insights on this matter. And we can start with you, Brian. Do you guys believe that an industry standard of accreditation would be beneficial? Maybe an official certification that shows the simulation solution is rated as an evidence-based educational platform?
It's a great question and great analogy to the drone market. I kind of like what you did there. The issue is, what is the standardization for? So you're saying, a law enforcement type market needs to have this, or in order to, you're getting into areas where I know everyone wants the certification and they want to have some standardization of things. And that's great, but I think we're not even there yet in terms of defining what the need is and what we should address and how to use it. If you were to say there should be this is what we know from simulation that works, and this is how you can use it, I think that guiding sort of principles would be enough in a sense, versus having someone, did you qualify here, or did this, or I'm going to measure your system, or it must pass these tests. I think just an overall, this is what we know works. This is what you need to address. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. Or here's what you need to stay away from because that's junk. That would be enough, because then as a consumer, because you're talking about too, when it's government stuff and it's DoD, it's going to be big, it's going to be systems, and they're looking to address and focus on a lot of people. Well, with like law enforcement, maybe I'm the chief of a police agency of 100 people. Well, do I need all of that? Do I have, because I should be the one saying what's important at my agency and what works. But when it comes to training and simulation, there is not a lot of, we don't know as much as we think we do across the board. Now, there are people out there who understand it, absolutely. So I would say something as simple as these are the governing principles of simulation technology that work. This is what we know works. This is what we know doesn't work. So you have to stay in the bucket of this is what works. So now maybe I am at that agency and I'm evaluating different vendors for me to use. I can have this and say, well, I read this report and here's the guidelines from this report that says this is what we know. How does your system fall into that? Or how do you do that? And then I can evaluate it. So having something, some national standard is tough to do. And I don't know if it's necessary because, people are still figuring this stuff out. So I just think those guiding principles of what are you addressing? What problem does this solve? I mean, that's the biggest thing with some of these. I've seen people invest hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions. And I'm like, what problem does this solve? And you're spending it with this technology. I mean, it's like that was the shot spotter system. It's like you spent millions of dollars on this thing that told you something that people in that neighborhood already knew, so I could have asked them. Two, I didn't use it for subsequent prosecution or anything. In fact, I barely used any of it. So what did we get out of this? You know what I'm saying? It's what problem does this really solve? And so if you can focus on that and be clear about what problem you're trying to solve or what the training objective is, the market will respond to your RFP. That's the big thing about the government and the military. Realize like, hey, wait a minute, we don't have to say, hey, build us something. What do you have? We can just say, well, here's what we want. Here's the requirements. Go build us. And you're going to have people banging at your door going, here's how I address it. That's the beauty of that, of our system of how we do that. And I think it's the same thing in law enforcement too. And so you have to just draw on the science. And this is what we know about modeling and simulation. I don't care what your experience as a training officer at a police agency is. I don't. This is a technology that you didn't build it. You didn't have a background in. You don't understand it, but we think we do. And it's not bashing on them. It's like, look, you've got this great knowledge. Let's use it in this manner. I guess that would be my approach, I think, is all that's really necessary versus some sort of standardization or even, requirements or certification.
So Jared, we've never been asked this question ever, so this is wonderful. And I want to show you that this is what I just wrote while Brian was preparing. I was preparing my remarks. So this is an uncanny valley we just dropped into. So intentionality and clear. LSD in the late 60s was not illegal. Lysergic acid diethylamide was something that Timothy Leary and people were playing with. And so there's a great Dragnet episode, if you're old like me and you watch Dragnet, and I watched it when it was first coming out, that talks about them saying, hey, this is dangerous. We got to put some controls on it. And they ultimately did. And I, the storyteller's back, I compare that with what was the name of range control in early kinetic Iraq. Look, we knew we had to have it. It just wasn't the right time until we got a few things in order. So the idea is that, look, do we build it and spend a lot of time and money and buy experts and do all that? Or do we create a requirement and ask you to build it? That's the beauty of the situation right now, is let's go where the expertise is rather than sitting there spinning and trying to say, well, we have an old team of people that used to work on these problems. And then I wrote down, what problem are we trying to solve? Boy, that sounds eerily familiar, Brian. But that's the key. The key is that, look, we have a lot of companies out there building technology for a problem that doesn't exist. The problem that exists now is a training pipeline that goes back to the old standard over and over and over again. And nobody's done a cognitive task analysis on where the danger really is out on the street. And we have, and people have spent tens of millions, if not $100 million on our approach and our methodology. This isn't about us. It's about you. How do you want to solve the future problems? And if you want to do them scientifically, we've cracked the code on one thing. Look, we don't know it all. My life is a mess. The only good thing that I do in my life is this, but we've got the answer to this. So sit back, listen, and I'll give you an example. The two things that come to mind about you, Jared, is, first of all, the vid that you posted was spot on. It was absolutely wonderful, and I hope people are listening and looking, because you addressed a bunch of what we're talking about right now. The second thing is, I think it was a year ago. It was right about a year ago. There was a program that Brian and I were involved with a couple of years ago where the Danish police wanted to gather information, and the female you interviewed was one of those people that was a pioneer in that. And I'm thinking it was a year ago, and she was spot on. And the assessments that they were doing in law enforcement. Look, a study is necessary. A study is necessary to find out where the gaps are. Then technology can fill those gaps and those seams. But if we're out there just trying to make technological advances for sale, then maybe we have the wrong motivation. And I'll tell you, what you do and what we do unintentionally is we poke the eyes. Like, there's somebody out there that's making smoke and bombs and IED simulators and everything else, and they're shaking their fist at us and saying, "No, you bastard, this is the best way." Show me. Prove it to me. You show me that your system of firing full automatic and, shaking my brain and making me smell like the smell generator. Brian and I think one of the very first times that we met was at the inception of the infantry immersive training. They had a day where a person came out and said, this smell generator and this wind generator. And then another company was saying this thing and that thing. And it was all toys. And the toys were really cool, and it was a lot of fun. But are we building Cedar Point? Are we building Six Flags? Are we trying to build a cognitive gym where you get a gosh damn good workout every time you go in, and every time you come out, your synapses are firing and you're ready to take on the day? That's Brian and I. That's what differentiates, I think, Arcadia from a lot of people on the market.
Yeah, cognitive gym. I like that. One last question, and I appreciate all of your insights. Very educational for me. What top tips would you recommend for in-industry simulation solution providers to integrate these principles of cognitive science into their training programs to promote these skill mastery and to create these cognitive gyms?
Brian, you want to start?
I would say the first thing they should do is hire us. No.
And buy the book. I like both of those.
So there we go. So there's that. No, and it goes back to what Greg and I were just talking about. It's okay. You have to perform some sort of cognitive task analysis, some type of capabilities gap assessment. What are we trying to address? And then what's the best manner in which to address it? And knowing, I think knowing and fully understanding the limitations of what your product is better than really knowing all of the possibilities. Because if you stay within the box of what the limits of it are, then you're good. You're always going to be good. And then you can always develop better content with user feedback. And they're going to end up using it in a manner that you didn't know. I mean, that's what I used to tell the Marine Corps, when they were looking at stuff, and it was like, well, go give it to that group of Lance Corporals over there and see what they come up with, because they know their job and they're going to find something. And if it works, they're going to love it and they're going to tell you how they used it. And if it doesn't work, they're going to break it and say, send you home. I mean, and that's the idea is that feedback from folks. So it's understanding the limitations of what your product can do. And then really, really focusing on, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's what, and for us, it's obviously cognition and it's sense making and problem solving. But if it's something else, then just focus on that one thing. I mean, right. If you start with that, then you can master that. Greg always gives the Ben and Jerry's analogy where Ben and Jerry's, ice cream, they got all those different flavors. And they said, yeah, what the most important one is vanilla. And it's like, well, what do you mean? Well, if I get vanilla right, if you nail that, then everything else is a comparison to that, and it's going to mix together well. So it's like, oh, okay. So what is the baseline thing you're really trying to do? And I see stuff where everyone, we've got an app for that. We've got a scenario for that. Oh yeah, no, we have a scenario for that. It's like, what, you have 150 different scenarios in here. How about 1 or 3 that are really, 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 really good, and not worry about having 300 in there, because the number of them doesn't matter. And that was one of the things that attracted us with MILO too. They were like, well, we've got this many scenarios, and looking back now, I think it was one of their head folks, and he was like, they suck. And I was like, hey, you are light years ahead of the market right now, just with that recognition of like, hey, we really should improve these. And so that would be all I would say. No, Greg will add more, but those things. Yeah. So know the limitations and focus on the one thing that you can do.
So what Brian said about the Marine Corps, I have to tell you this, having taught cops and martial artists for years before I ever started the Combat Hunter program. You walk into a room of Marines and you're talking shit, or you're not the subject matter expert, they will beat you up and roll you down into a ditch. And you don't stick around.
Kill you and eat
they
you.
know. They really will. And so to that end, to caveat Brian's comments just now, look at what we learned in Ukraine with drones in such a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. That's a perfect analogy. Hey, we all understand UAVs and the future in this, but did we know that we were going to get from flash to bang this quickly? You had to give it to the street, and we always street it up. I want to make science accessible to anybody by letting them understand it in the guise of what they do in a normal day, right? So drone technology was the same thing. We didn't think about AIs or drone technology until we started seeing the Yoo-hoo films or whatever it is coming out of the live action. I'm not a real, what do they call that, person that's up on like all the different methods. Brian has to steer me to him and show me how to find, like even getting on the call this morning. Hey, listen, it only shows join. Yeah, click that. You'll be fine. So to give you my answer, the idea is make it simple. The old keep it simple, stupid. I throw away the last S because nobody's stupid. You're just trying to learn. And the harder you want to learn, the more I say, go out in your parking lot. Before you buy all this technology, before you invest in that stuff, get a couple of MRE crates and set them up, and take some chalk that you buy at sidewalk chalk at the dollar store and walk through a couple of ideas that way. Because that lowest level, the lowest calorie intervention helps your training division start going, let's get back on the mat. Let's get back to white belt. Because the more I sweat on the mat, the less I bleed on the street. And we keep saying those gosh damn platitudes, but we don't live them. So this idea, more happens in the parking lot. And if you can tune into that parking lot, you're going to stop the school shooting. You're going to stop that armed robbery. You're going to stop that workplace violence. And guess what? We're all on Mount Palomar looking out to Mars thinking of the next greatest thing yet, to quote a great friend of mine, Brian Marren. We haven't even, mapped out all the recesses in the ocean on our own planet, right? So the idea is street it up, make it digestible so every one of the people hearing your voice can understand it, and then look to the parking lot, not to the skies. Take your time. This is a skill, and we're all going to get smarter, faster, and harder to kill. And we can get there together if we work collaboratively. Oh, and P.S. hire us and buy the book.
Great insights.
That's a Marren thing. There you go. I like that.
Definitely great insights. Arcadia Cognerati is on the forefront of cognitive training. Are there any new developments or areas of focus you guys are excited about for the future, particularly in the realm of cognitive training and its integration in simulation technology?
Yeah, well, the beauty about a lot of this stuff is it's getting a lot cheaper, and there's a lot more user end stuff that you can do. So we've got some things that we're working on, especially with some 360 video and a very inexpensive VR headset, to where we're just developing our own now at this point too. And so it's kind of we just did a quick little test of it. Was super impressed with what we came up with in just a couple of hours of grabbing some people to film. Didn't even know what we were going to do until we got there, and then put it in and worked with a company that's not even in the US yet. And, so it's pretty powerful stuff. So we're excited about that, and to get some more content in it to really capture it. Again, we have to walk our talk. So we have to map out what we want to do and what the most effective way to use it. And thankfully, because again, the price point on this stuff has come down drastically, we can kind of do a lot of that testing. And so we can get something out there that really focus on what we do about HBP RNA, human behavior pattern recognition analysis, and the limits of cognitive performance. So, and that's all, being preventive, being proactive, doing all the things. I don't care once the shooting starts. We've missed everything. We haven't made good decisions at that point, or we could have changed something. So we always wind the tape back. That's why Greg's talking about the parking lot. What can you do here before you ever pull up and contact someone? What happens in the parking lot? Everything's going on in the parking lot. You're there at Home Depot buying whatever you can for the weekend, but there's a dope deal going on in the corner from a transport moving up from Mexico. There's a domestic violence situation happening over there. There's kids being dropped off because the dad's got them for the weekend and they have to do it in a public place. There's all this stuff happening. And so it's all out there. And so if we can focus on that, then we're not going to be surprised every time. So that's kind of what we have coming up to, and putting that into a headset that we can continue our training and continue to get reps in after our in-person courses.
Yeah, and I would add to that a cautionary tale. First of all, we are being blinded every day with science, which is amazing. So we need to invent a pair of sunglasses to go along with that so we can see these advancements and not be fooled. And what do I mean by being fooled? Jim Mattis took me aside and said, listen, while you're out there red celling and doing your mission, I want you to check out the system, VBS, Virtual Battle Space. Every base has one. I made sure of it. I want you to see what's going on there. So every base that I went to, in addition to my training in the red cell and all the other stuff I did, I stopped in. It was a cool environment because they had it air conditioned. It was antiseptic. There were 20, 30 spaces inside the room. There was a young E6 that took me in and showed it to me, and never was I in a base where VBS was being used. First cautionary tale. If you're going to build it, they will come. Nope. You got to put their asses in the chairs. Second thing is, everybody that was playing with this big video game, the leader, the E6, and remember, they didn't have nefarious intent. They would take me in the virtual world, jump on a motorcycle with the dog on the back, put on an SVD, and drive to the flight line where they would get into a hip or a hind and some manner of Sikorsky and fly over the village and start rocket attacking people at random. And I go, okay, my job was to keep you safe from bombs, from snipers, and from insider threats. And you showed me this multi-million-dollar system. And every base, it was exactly the same. I go, what's with the dog? Well, I got to have a companion. What's with the rifle? It's a cool rifle. Listen, don't expect somebody to play a game and not play a game. If you want to cross that bridge to cognitive reality, there's training and a bunch of research that's got to be there. Most of the research has been done, but there's some new wonderful stuff. Just don't gamify something just to get good feedback, because that's the wrong direction. You got to have a tangible result at the end of your study.
Yeah. What a great point. I remember using VBS4 and implementing zombies and low light, low vis, fog environments, and just having a blast with it. So,
you had a ball. You had your lunch there.
Understand? Right. Yeah. So I completely understand, and I agree. Now that I'm a little older.
There you go.
Brian, Greg, you guys have any closing remarks? Any saved rounds?
No, not for one. I appreciate you having us on here and talking about it. I love some of the conversations you've had, and
yes.
I've been following your stuff for a while because you're having some great conversations. You've had some other amazing people on too that have some great technologies that are really focusing on what matters. And so I think, I would say thank you. And then please keep the conversation going, because this is how those changes occur. You know what I mean? Where people are going, well, wait a minute, what about this? And what are we really focusing on? And to anyone listening who's at one of these places or at an agency or looking into this type of technology, you have a lot more say than you think you do. You can demand from the marketplace what you want to focus on. You can demand this is what we want, and if they can't provide you for that, someone will. Someone else will. And that's the thing, is that there's a lot out there.
Amen. And my only touch on this would be, I apologize for not saying the champion's path enough, because you know that my only social media, that's the word I've been searching for. The only social media thing I have is LinkedIn. And so to me, LinkedIn is this huge thing. I've been on there for almost 10 years now, right? And LinkedIn is this amazing thing. I like write answers to stuff. And Jared, I've written stuff to you before on the thing. And then Brian goes, hey, have you ever heard this guy, Jared? I've been following for a while and he listens up. And then all of a sudden it was like a marriage made in heaven. Here's that Hoberman sphere. All I had to turn is that Fabergé egg a little bit on end and peek in there. And here we are in the same space. And it's wonderful. I love your stuff. Please keep it up. Honest to God, Hoberman is a theory of the future that you can embrace now. And let's get there together.
Yeah. We had a student this past week in class who literally opened up the Hoberman all the way and put his head inside of it and wore the Hoberman sphere. Yeah. And I thought that was wonderful. So.
Different perspective.
Or scary. It was frightening or wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you again, both of you, for sharing your expertise, the work you're doing at Arcadia Cognerati to equip law enforcement officers with effective training is truly commendable. This has been a valuable learning experience for me, and I really hope that you guys have a safe and productive week. Thanks very much.
Humbled.
Thanks, Jared.
Humbled, buddy.